7 nice girl habits all women must break. Let me start with something important. Being kind, loving, and generous in a relationship is a beautiful thing. But there's a difference between being kind and being too accommodating at the cost of yourself. Because when you fall into certain nice girl habits, what actually happens is you don't create love, you create imbalance, you lose your voice, you lose your power. And ironically, you push away the very connection you want. So today, let's talk about shifting that, because the goal is not to become cold or distant. The goal is to become grounded, self-respecting, and authentically attractive. One of the biggest habits to break is saying yes when you actually mean no. A lot of women have been conditioned to keep the peace, avoid conflict, and make others comfortable. But here's the truth. Every time you betray your own truth, you teach someone else that your needs don't matter. And a healthy relationship, it's built on honesty, not silent sacrifice. Another pattern is overgiving to earn love. You might think, if I just do more, give more, be more, he'll finally see my value. But love doesn't work like a transaction. Real attraction grows when there's space, when both people invest, not just one. Then there's the habit of avoiding difficult conversations. You don't want to seem too much, so you stay quiet about what bothers you. But what you're really doing is building resentment slowly, quietly, until it shows up in ways you didn't expect. Your voice is not a problem. Your needs are not a burden. And let's talk about seeking constant approval. When your sense of worth depends on someone else's validation, you give away your emotional power. You start shaping yourself into who you think they want instead of being who you truly are. One of the most common patterns that quietly undermines a woman's confidence in her relationships is the habit of people-pleasing, especially saying yes when she truly means no. On the surface, it can look like kindness, generosity, or being easygoing. But underneath, it often comes from a deeper place, a desire to be liked, accepted, or not rejected. And while that intention is completely human, the long-term impact can slowly disconnect her from her own needs, her own truth, and ultimately her sense of self. Imagine this: someone asks for your time, your energy, or your presence, and something inside you hesitates. Maybe you feel tired, maybe it doesn't align with what you want, maybe it simply doesn't feel right. But instead of honoring that feeling, you override it. You smile, you agree, and you say, "Wes!" In that moment, it feels easier. You avoid conflict. You avoid disappointment. You keep things smooth. But every time that happens, there's a subtle cost, because each yes that goes against your truth becomes a quiet message to yourself. My needs are not as important. And over time, those small moments stack up. You begin to feel drained, unappreciated, or even invisible. Not because others are intentionally trying to overlook you, but because you've trained them to believe you're always okay with everything. The truth is, people don't always recognize unspoken boundaries. They respond to what you show them. If you consistently show that you're available, flexible, and willing to accommodate no matter what, they will naturally continue to meet you at that level, not out of disrespect, but out of habit. And here's where it becomes even more important. Attraction and respect in relationships are deeply connected to authenticity. When you say what you truly mean and stand by it, you create clarity. You show that you value yourself, and that energy is felt. It creates a sense of grounded confidence that draws people in, not pushes them away. But when you constantly bend yourself to keep others comfortable, something shifts. You may start to feel resentment building beneath the surface. You might think, why doesn't he appreciate me more? Or why do I feel like I'm giving so much and getting so little back? And often it's because the relationship has become unbalanced, not by intention, but by pattern. Breaking this habit doesn't mean becoming harsh or unkind. It doesn't mean rejecting people or creating unnecessary conflict. It simply means learning to pause and check in with yourself before you respond. It means giving yourself permission to feel what you feel without immediately dismissing it. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, "Let me think about that," instead of giving an automatic answer. That small pause creates space for honesty. And from that place, you can respond in a way that actually reflects your truth. And when you do say no, it doesn't have to come with guilt or long explanations. A clear, respectful response is enough. The people who truly value you will respect your boundaries. In fact, they'll trust you more because they know your yes is genuine, not automatic. There's also a deeper shift that happens internally. When you start honoring your own needs, you begin to rebuild trust with yourself. You feel more aligned, more confident, and more in control of your life. Instead of reacting out of fear or obligation, you start choosing from a place of self-respect. And that changes everything about how you show up in relationships. Because when you respect your own boundaries, you teach others to do the same. Another pattern that often feels loving on the surface, but quietly creates imbalance underneath, is the habit of over-giving to earn love. It can look like being incredibly thoughtful, always available, constantly checking in, doing more than what's asked, and trying to anticipate every need before it's even expressed. And while generosity is a beautiful quality, this kind of giving is different. It's not coming from a place of fullness, it's coming from a hope that if you give enough, you'll finally feel chosen, valued, or secure. At the heart of this pattern is a belief that love must be earned, that your worth in a relationship is tied to how much you can offer, how much you can do, or how much you can sacrifice. So you go above and beyond, thinking it will deepen the connection. You might find yourself initiating most of the conversations, planning everything, being the emotional support system, and showing up in ways that feel almost one-sided. And for a while, it might even seem like it's working. The connection feels close. There's interaction, attention, maybe even appreciation. But over time, something begins to feel off. You start to notice that you're the one carrying most of the emotional weight. You're the one trying to keep things alive. And instead of feeling fulfilled, you begin to feel exhausted. Because love is not meant to be a one-person effort. When you overgive, you unintentionally remove the space for the other person to invest. Relationships thrive on mutual contribution. There needs to be room for both people to show up, to care, to give, and to build something together. But if one person is doing all the work, the dynamic becomes unbalanced, not because the other person doesn't care, but because they're not being invited or required to step up. There's also something deeper happening on an emotional level. When you give from a place of trying to earn love, it creates pressure. It turns connection into a subtle transaction, even if that's not your intention. You might not say it out loud, but there's an unspoken expectation. I'm doing all of this, so I hope you'll love me, choose me, stay, and people can feel that energy. Real attraction doesn't grow from pressure. It grows from presence. It grows when two people are choosing each other freely, not because one is constantly proving their worth. Over-giving can also lead to losing touch with your own needs. You become so focused on the other person that you forget to ask yourself what you actually want, what you actually need, and whether those needs are being met. You might ignore your own boundaries, your own desires, and your own emotional well-being, all in an effort to maintain the connection. But a relationship where you have to overextend yourself to feel secure is not a relationship that's truly supporting you. Shifting this pattern starts with recognizing that your value is not something you have to prove. It's something you bring simply by being who you are. You don't have to earn a place in someone's life by over-delivering. The right person will meet you halfway, not watch you do all the work. It also means allowing space. Space for the other person to reach out, to plan, to invest, and to show interest. That space can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to being the one who fills it. But it's necessary, because without that space, you never truly see how much the other person is willing to give. And that clarity matters. When you begin to give from a place of genuine desire rather than fear, everything changes. Your actions feel lighter, more authentic, and more aligned with who you are. You're no longer trying to secure love, you're expressing it in a way that feels natural and balanced. And in that space, a healthier, more mutual connection has the chance to grow. Another habit that quietly weakens connection over time is avoiding difficult conversations. It often comes from a good place. You don't want to create tension, you don't want to seem demanding, and you definitely don't want to risk pushing someone away. So instead of speaking up when something bothers you, you tell yourself it's not a big deal, or I'll just let it go. But here's what actually happens when you do that. The feeling doesn't disappear, it gets stored. Every time you ignore something that matters to you, it doesn't resolve itself internally. It lingers, and those small, unspoken moments begin to build on each other. At first, it might just feel like a slight discomfort. Then it turns into frustration, and over time, that frustration can quietly grow into resentment. The challenge is, by the time that resentment surfaces, it often comes out in ways that feel confusing or overwhelming to the other person, because from their perspective, everything seemed fine. You never expressed that something was wrong. You stayed agreeable, calm, and easygoing. So when the emotions finally spill over, it can feel sudden and unexpected. And that creates a disconnect. Avoiding hard conversations doesn't protect the relationship, it actually creates distance within it. Because real intimacy isn't built on perfection or constant harmony. It's built on honesty. It's built on the ability to say, this is how I feel, even when it's uncomfortable. There's also a fear many women carry that if they speak up, they'll be seen as too much, too emotional, too needy, too demanding. So they silence themselves in order to be accepted. But in doing that, they're not actually being accepted for who they are. They're being accepted for the version of themselves that stays quiet. And that version isn't sustainable. Your thoughts, your feelings, your needs, they are not problems to hide. They are part of what makes a relationship real. When you express them clearly and calmly, you give the other person the opportunity to understand you, to meet you, and to grow with you. Without that communication, there's no real way for the relationship to evolve. Another important piece here is that avoiding conversations often comes from assuming how the other person will react. You might think, hey, he's going to get upset, or this will turn into an argument, so you decide it's better not to say anything at all. But those assumptions keep you stuck. They keep you from giving the other person a chance to respond differently. And sometimes you'll be surprised. Sometimes, when you communicate honestly, the response is understanding, supportive, and respectful. And even if it's not perfect, it opens the door for a real conversation instead of silent tension. There's also a way to approach difficult conversations that creates connection instead of conflict. It's not about blaming or accusing. It's about sharing your experience. Instead of saying, you never listen, you might say, I feel unheard when this happens. That shift changes the entire tone. It invites understanding rather than defensiveness. It's also about timing and energy. Choosing a moment when you're calm, grounded, and clear allows you to express yourself in a way that feels constructive instead of reactive. Because the goal isn't to win an argument, it's to create understanding. And when you begin to speak up consistently, something powerful happens internally. You start to feel more aligned with yourself. You stop second-guessing your emotions. You trust your voice, and that confidence changes how you show up. Not just in one relationship, but in every area of your life. Because when you stop avoiding difficult conversations, you start creating honest connections. Another pattern that can deeply affect the quality of your relationships is tolerating behavior that doesn't truly meet your standards. It often starts subtly. Something feels off, maybe it's inconsistency, lack of effort, broken promises, or a tone that doesn't sit right with you. You notice it, you feel it, but instead of addressing it or stepping back, you explain it away. You tell yourself, maybe he's just busy, or he didn't mean it like that, or it's not that serious. And in doing so, you give the situation more chances than it actually deserves. Now, giving someone understanding and grace is important. No one is perfect, and every relationship requires patience. But there's a difference between healthy understanding and repeatedly lowering your standards to keep someone in your life. Because every time you tolerate something that goes against what you truly want or deserve, you send a message both to yourself and to the other person. To yourself, the message becomes, this is acceptable. And to the other person, the message becomes, this is enough. Not because they're intentionally trying to fall short, but because people tend to meet the level of what is allowed. If there are no clear boundaries, there's no clear understanding of what matters to you. And over time, this creates a dynamic where you may feel undervalued or overlooked. You might start questioning why the effort isn't there, why the consistency is missing, or why you're not being treated the way you hoped. But the truth is, the pattern was quietly set from the beginning through what was accepted without question. There's also an emotional cost to this. When you consistently tolerate behavior that doesn't align with your standards, it creates an internal conflict. On one hand, you know what you want. On the other hand, you're accepting something different. That gap between what you desire and what you experience can lead to frustration, disappointment, and even self-doubt. You may begin to wonder if your expectations are too high, if you're asking for too much, or if you should just be more understanding. But having standards is not the problem. Standards are what protect your time, your energy, and your emotional well-being. They are not about controlling someone else's behavior. They are about deciding what you are willing to accept in your life. And when you don't uphold those standards, It often leads to staying in situations longer than you should. You keep hoping things will change. You wait for effort to increase, for communication to improve, for consistency to show up. But change doesn't happen simply because you hope for it. It happens when there is awareness, willingness, and action. And sometimes that requires you to draw a clear line. That line doesn't have to be dramatic or confrontational. It can be calm, clear, and grounded. It might sound like, "This is important to me," or "I'm looking for something more consistent," or even making a decision to step back when your needs aren't being met. And here's the key: boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about creating clarity. They help the right people understand how to show up for you, and they naturally filter out the ones who are not aligned. When you hold your standards, you shift the entire dynamic of your relationships. You move from a place of hoping to be chosen to a place of consciously choosing what aligns with you. You no longer stay in situations out of fear or uncertainty. You stay because the connection genuinely meets you where you are. And internally, something powerful happens. You begin to trust yourself more. You stop questioning your worth. You recognize that you don't have to settle for less just to keep someone in your life. Because the moment you truly honor your standards, you redefine what you allow, and that changes the kind of love you experience. Another habit that can quietly hold you back in relationships is the pressure to be perfect, the need to always say the right thing, act the right way, and present yourself in a way that feels flawless and effortless. On the surface, it may seem like you're simply trying to be your best self, but underneath, it's often driven by a deeper fear, the fear that if you're not perfect, you won't be fully accepted. So you become highly aware of how you come across. You think twice before expressing certain thoughts. You hold back parts of your personality. You filter your emotions. You try to avoid mistakes, awkward moments, or anything that might make you seem less than ideal. And while this might create a polished image, it also creates distance. Because real connection doesn't happen in perfection, it happens in authenticity. It happens in the moments where you're real, unfiltered, and human. When you're constantly trying to present a perfect version of yourself, you're not allowing someone to truly see you. And if they can't see the real you, they can't fully connect with you. There's also an emotional weight that comes with trying to be perfect all the time. It's exhausting to constantly monitor your words, your reactions, and your behavior. It creates pressure in situations that are meant to feel natural and enjoyable. Instead of being present in the moment, you're in your head, analyzing, adjusting, and second-guessing yourself. You might find yourself replaying conversations afterward, wondering if you said too much or too little. You might worry about whether you came across the right way, and slowly, that self-consciousness takes away from your ability to relax and just be. The truth is, perfection is not what makes someone attractive. In fact, it can sometimes make it harder for others to connect with you. When everything appears too polished, it can feel intimidating or even distant. People don't bond over perfection. They bond over shared experiences, vulnerability, and authenticity. Think about the moments when you felt closest to someone. It's usually not when everything was flawless. It's when there was laughter over something unexpected, honesty about something real, or openness about something meaningful. Those are the moments that create emotional connection. Another challenge with trying to be perfect is that it often leads to hiding your true needs and feelings. You might avoid expressing when something bothers you because you don't want to seem difficult. You might downplay your desires because you don't want to come across as demanding. But in doing that, you're not giving the relationship a chance to grow in a real and honest way. You're maintaining an image instead of building a connection. And over time, that can lead to feeling unseen or misunderstood, not because the other person isn't capable of understanding you, but because they've only been given a limited, edited version of who you are. Letting go of perfection doesn't mean you stop caring or stop growing. It simply means you allow yourself to be human. You allow space for imperfections, for learning, for moments that aren't perfectly planned or executed. It also means trusting that who you are, without constant adjustment, is enough. When you show up authentically, something shifts. You feel more relaxed, more confident, and more connected to yourself. You're no longer trying to perform or impress, you're simply expressing. And that energy is naturally more inviting. It also creates a healthier dynamic in the relationship. When you're real, it gives the other person permission to be real too. It removes pressure and replaces it with comfort and openness. And that's where deeper connection begins to form. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to be perfect, it's to be genuine. So when you step back and look at all of this together, a clear pattern begins to emerge. None of these habits, people pleasing, over giving, staying silent, lowering your standards, or trying to be perfect, come from weakness. They come from a desire to be loved, accepted, and valued. And that desire is completely natural. But when those habits start costing you your voice, your peace, and your sense of self, they stop serving you. Because the truth is, love was never meant to be something you earn by shrinking yourself. It's not something you secure by overextending, overthinking, or overcompensating. Real healthy connection doesn't require you to lose who you are. It requires you to be who you are. And that shift changes everything. When you start saying what you truly feel, you create honesty. When you stop overgiving, you create balance. When you speak up, you create understanding. When you hold your standards, you create respect. And when you let go of perfection, you create real connection. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to yourself, the version of you that knows her worth, trusts her instincts, and doesn't apologize for taking up space in her own life. Because the right relationship won't be built on you trying harder. It will be built on you showing up fully and being met there. And when that happens, love doesn't feel confusing or exhausting anymore. It feels natural. It feels mutual. It feels right.